viewers, welcome once again to another exciting episode on Chess Intense. And today we'll be doing a recap of the games that I played at the President's Cup in Accra in August. The President's Cup is an annual event, a classical tournament that is held in Accra every year, and I managed to take part in that tournament, and I'll be doing a recap of the games that I played in the tournament, and we'll see how it goes. So stay tuned as we review the games that I played in the tournament. My first round game was against Maxwell, and I managed to win this game. So this was a short game and therefore would be a very short episode. So in the game, I started with 1d4. I think it was expected of him that I would play, and he responded with 1d5. I went c4, the Queen's Gambit, and he goes for the declined variation, e6. So here, sometimes I play knight c3, sometimes I play knight f3, but I tend to prefer to play knight f3 more in this position, as it allows me to castle early on the king side, and allows me to play e3 if black takes on c4. So here I play knight f3, and knight f6 was played, and I played g3. So I'm preparing to go into the Catalan structures, and after bishop e7 I play bishop g2. So he castles on the king side, and I also follow suit and castle on the king side. And here the main line is to capture on c4, and after queen c2 a6, and then I play a4, and then bishop d7 I capture on c4, and then bishop c6. But here instead he decides to also fianchetto on the queen side to counter my fianchetto on the king side. So after playing queen c2, he goes bishop b7, and then here what I should have gone for was to take on d5, and after, let's say, knight takes on d5, I have knight c3, and I have promise of pushing the e4 pawn and then getting a good game. So e4, e5, and maybe a3, b5, bishop b2, and that should be good for me here. And if it takes with a pawn, he recaptures with a pawn. If I take on d5, he recaptures with a pawn. Then I guess I could play knight c3, and then bishop f4, knight c3, bishop f4. And here with the bishop f4, he doesn't have the knight to come to d5 and attack the bishop on f4. The bishop is also exerting some influence along this diagonal together with the queen, and it should be a good game for me. But playing bishop f4 was a little bit of an inaccurate move, and in a few moves you would see why it didn't prove so correct for me. So I gave him some chances in the opening. He played knight bd7, I go knight bd2, and here in anticipation of rook c8 and taking on c5, taking on c4, pushing c5, I'd have to struggle a little bit in the opening. And so for that reason I should have taken on d5 much early on. So here he plays rook c8, he's preparing to play c5, and then I play queen a4. I'm attacking the a7 pawn, but that wouldn't be any big deal as he has a5 to play and gain some space on the queen side. His bishop could come and rest on b4, and so it wasn't really so much of a threatening move. And I play knight e5, and here I'm looking at the fact that he can't capture on c4. That would leave the bishop en prise, and so I take advantage of that and then open up the diagonal here. But at the same time, I also want to allow this knight to come in, because this knight doesn't really have so many places to go. It's kind of stuck over here, and so I wanted to free the second knight a little bit. That's why I played knight e5. He takes on e5, I take with my bishop on e5, and then he plays knight g4. So here I bring my knight to f3 to allow some mobility of my pieces. and he takes on c4. So here I capture with a queen on c4, and then he takes my bishop on e5. I take with a pawn, and much better to take with a pawn because it would restrict the mobility of the bishop. It can't come to f6, and then can't come to d6, and opens up the d file for my rooks. So I taking with the pawn here was, although doubles up the pawn, it's more of an advantage here for white to take with the pawn. So the queen comes to d5, expecting that I would exchange the queen. So here when I talked to him after the game, of course he offered a queen exchange because he thought that after queens have been exchanged off the board, he would have a much better chance to draw the game than when the queens are on the board. But as you can see in the opening, black had more of an advantage here, and so he should have been rather pushing for a win, not asking to exchange queens, because here the computer doesn't actually even approve of the queen exchange. It says I should exchange queens and I should have a much better game here. Black should have instead played c5 and maintain the advantage, the queen side space, the space on the queen side with c5, and with both bishops, having both bishops, there's more chance for black than there is for white. So offering the queen exchange, I declined, brought my queen to c1, and then he was trying to force the queen exchange here, and I played queen f4. And here the bishop comes to a6 to attack the pawn on e2, and I use that as a chance to activate my rook to c1. So he plays queen b4, and here I wouldn't be able to decline the exchange. My b2 pawn is hanging and my e2 pawn is hanging, so I can't move the queen to any other square else but to exchange the queen. So I take on b4, and here when I bend down to write my move queen x b4, I was waiting for the bishop to take on b4. Then here I push a3, and if he plays c5, then I get to play b4, and what he can't take, if he takes, I recapture and I attack both bishops. So I thought maybe that would be something good for me, but I lifted my head and then found out that he had, instead of taking with the bishop, he took with a pawn, which meant that I had to come up with something new, and so I was a little surprised in this position. And here so as I was searching for what to play, I found out that I could play my knight to d4. It appears that I'm playing knight d4 to protect the pawn on e2, but in actual fact I am aiming to put the knight on c6. And here, realizing that he thought I was defending the pawn on e2 with the knight d4, he immediately pushed c5, and then I also went to c6. Now the pawn isn't hanging because the bishop is hanging here, and so he retreats the bishop to d8. Now before playing knight c6, I'd have to be sure that I have an escape square for this knight, or something to do with this knight, because as you can see, the knight doesn't have so many squares to go to, except for a7. All the squares it can return to are being blocked by the pawn. And so I thought that if it comes to the worst case scenario, I could take the bishop on d8. The bishop played to d8. I could take the bishop on d8, and I wouldn't lose a piece here. So after playing d8, I pushed my pawn to e3, protecting the pawn. And here again, without thinking so much, he played bishop b5, losing to a simple fork on knight a7. Here, when he played bishop b5, at the instance I saw that I could take the pawn here, and he couldn't recapture because this rook is hanging. But then I saw something better. That was knight a7, wins the exchange, and gives me a very, very, very comfortable position. And after a3, I don't think he should have recaptured a3. He should have played something else, maybe b3, sorry. But taking on, allowing me to open up the a file for my rook was the final nail in the coffin, because now this bishop wouldn't have anywhere to go to, any square to escape. So after rook c7, this bishop is going to be captured. If after bishop c5 I have rook a8, and there's no way for the bishop to run away. And so after playing rook c7, he played bishop d8, and then he hung the bishop, and then I picked up another piece, going up a full rook, and in this position my opponent resigned, giving me the first win in the tournament. Okay, and that concludes the first episode in this series of the game recaps from the President's Cup, and I'll be coming your way with more episodes, so don't forget to subscribe, and see you in the next one.